Okay, we're ready to reconvene here. And I would like to make an announcement about something I've been hearing about while everybody's getting back to their seats. I've been hearing about on WFPL, and I think all of us might be interested in participating in this on Monday, March 16th at 6 p.m. in the main library right across the street in the Centennial Room. What are innovative ways to address the growing homeless population in Louisville? So that's right where we all are, and I'd like to see people who really care about this issue there talking about what meaningful things that we can do. And we will be having a conversation a little later that will maybe touch on some of these things.
Oh, yeah, and that's going to be on the coalition's website, correct? Is that the coalition? Or, I'm sorry.
Let me do one more thing. And I also want to let you know that Tim's whole PowerPoint presentation will also be online on the coalition website, and we will get an email out to everybody who's registered with your email addresses here with that link, but it needs to be put on the link. And also we have the coalition has provided a videographer who is videoing this whole thing, and that will also be online.
So you'll be famous with me. We'll all be on the internets. Okay, so I'm going to try to stand down here a little bit, come down a little bit, because this way I can see. So I'm not going to crick in my neck. So we're going to talk a little bit more about interacting with people, basically, and then we're going to get into de-escalation. So that's the fun stuff right there, the fun stuff. So first of all, tone of voice. When I was in my undergraduate school, I attended psychology classes. I think I may have had Ms. Suzanne Meeks right here for psychology. And I learned the concept, and hopefully I'm not saying this in any way wrong, because it was a few years ago, but the concept of mirroring. And what that means is that if one person is talking like this, and the other person is talking like this, then the person who's talking like this, and the person who's talking like this, then eventually this person's gonna do. Right? If they're yelling, don't yell back, because if you yell back, they're gonna yell even louder, right? So the concept of mirroring is that eventually, if you stay steadfast and true to that calm, low voice, then eventually they are going to mirror you. It's just this concept in psychology, and it's true. It's hard to remember sometimes, because some of us, when someone's yelling at us, we want to yell back at them. If they're calling us names, we may want to call them names too. But the whole thing is that there was a slide that says, do you want to be right? Or do you want things to go well? It didn't really say that. It said something like that. But the thing is that, one of the reasons when I give this presentation, a lot of it is to frontline staff members. Because frontline staff members, they bear the brunt of the work that we do, because they see every single person, right? I see maybe 8 to 10 people a day. They see every single person. So they see every person who's coming in there intoxicated, yelling, screaming, whatever. They have to deal with it. And unfortunately, typically, our frontline staff has the least training of anyone in the staff, but yet they're the ones that have to interact with every single difficult client. So when I give this training, a lot of it is focused for them to teach them, because what works, outside of work doesn't work inside of work when we're working with these individuals, right? Because if outside of work, we're going to stand up for ourselves. We're not going to let people talk, we're going to, but inside and doing interactions with individuals who, with mental illness, with substance abuse, our goal is to prevent problems, right? We don't want to escalate a situation. any more than it's already escalated. In fact, we want to de-escalate it, right? We want to make things go smoothly so that no chairs get turned over or anything's caught on fire. We don't want any of those things, right? That's exactly what we're trying to avoid doing. So, remain calm and remember to breathe. That's something that when we're in the midst of a crisis, we typically forget to do, and it's very important because it keeps the oxygen in the blood flowing and all those things. Slow-paced. Sound confident that you can help them. Convey that you have time and that you care about them. Again, this is talking to people 101. But and the other thing is that I think it's so important that we convey that we don't think that the person is bad. Because so often people experiencing homelessness are treated as if they are bad, right? Like the way that people talk to them, often, unfortunately, even in the shelter system or wherever they come in contact with other individuals, they're the people who are supposed to be helping them are not trained. And they are overwhelmed by all the things they have to do, and they yell at the individual. And so we, as compassionate people on these compassionate teams, are wanting to convey care. And again, we're not trying to solve all of their problems. Wish we could. We all do. We wouldn't be sitting here on Friday morning. I mean, I know that you all wanted to hear this fabulous talk about Fabulous Me, but I'm sure there's some other fabulous things that you could be doing at this very moment, right? But you're here because you care about people, right? But again, we have to learn how to help and what our roles are going to be and what they're not. And that's just as important, learning those two things. Let's talk about it. Together we can figure something out. So I'm going to go back to this. I know I kind of skipped over this, but avoid these things. Avoid judging. The thing that we're going to be talking about in just a few minutes is trauma and what it is and why it makes people act kind of crazy sometimes. Just approaching each situation in a fresh, optimistic manner. Not, here we go again. Because if you bring that attitude, guess what's going to happen? It's not going to go so well. Because you convey a whole lot in your approach to someone and the words that you choose. I see some smiles. I think people know what I'm talking about. We all have those people at the church or at the organization that are a little gruffer than others, right? We all have those staff members that clients tend not to talk to. This is the way I describe it. It's like the Chi-Chi's conversation. So there's coworkers that if you are going to Chi-Chi's after work or after church, you're like, hey, let's go to Chi-Chi's. Sally, we're going to Chi-Chi's. There's the members who get invited to Chi-Chi's, and then there's the members who they don't even know anybody's going to Chi-Chi's because they're not going to be told that anybody's going to Chi-Chi's because they don't want you to go to Chi-Chi's. You know what I'm saying? Chi-Chi's was an old Mexican restaurant in the 1980s. That had fried ice cream, for those of you too young to know. So the thing is don't put the person who you're not inviting to Chi-Chi's on the homeless committee. They are not the ones to welcome or to educate the homeless individuals. You know what I'm saying? Like that is the last person you want on that committee to go out and try to, to figure out what's going on with the homeless individual. So just be very mindful and conscious of that. And the thing is that also know yourself. If you're having a rough day or week, this may not be the day to go out to talk to that person who is, doing whatever they're doing that is putting you, you're already in a bad space. So you go ask someone else to take it out today because the thing is that we want positive resolution because it's not just a positive resolution that we're hoping for. We're also hoping to avoid a negative solution, right? We don't want the police or the ambulance to have to come if they don't have to, right? We don't want church property to be destroyed because they're in a bad mood and I'm in a bad mood and now we're all in a really bad mood and stuff is flying. So We want to be very, very mindful of this. Okay, problem solving. Again, working together. Is there a common ground? Watchword choice. And then at the very end, just review with them. Okay, so what we're doing is we're coming up. Okay, you're heading on over to St. John's to go get a cup of coffee, and you're going to go talk to Tom Parmenter, I'm throwing that name around, Tom Parmenter, to talk about housing options. Yes, you're going to go do that. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye. Boop, boop, boop. Just reviewing what it is that you all discussed. And then being mindful of not promising anything. Also, this is something else to be mindful of. Now, your organizations, you all don't, you're not, necessarily, bound by confidentiality, but you do want to be very mindful of things, right? You want to make sure, and I think after an incident, if there's a violent incident, it's super important to talk about in a group about how it went. That's what we do. And then what we could have done different the next time, right? And what our policies should be about that. That's super important to learn from our mistakes, because that's how we learn, unfortunately, most often is through our mistakes. But not gossiping, right? Even though this is a big city, it is a small, big city. Everybody knows somebody, or you're related to their next door neighbor, or somehow their dog is your cousin, whatever it is. Somehow we're all, it's an ecosystem here in Louisville. So be very cognizant that you will probably learn some very personal information about clients. It's amazing, some clients won't tell you their name, and then the other clients will tell you their whole life story in 20 seconds. And it's like, oh, okay. But we have to be very, very mindful about what we do with that information, right? Because that's somebody's loved one. That is a human being. That is their life. That's their story. And if we share information in the wrong way, it can hurt them. And so we have to be very cognizant of that, okay? What if the angry person gets angry even though we're doing it all right, right? If you're like, well, I listened to this presentation by Tim Welsh, and I know exactly how to interact with people now, and I did everything right, and they still got mad. I don't know why, what's going on? Well, it's not you, fabulous people. Sometimes it's just them, right? Sometimes they're no matter what you do, however you approach it, if Barney the dinosaur were to come in and, just, hey, it wouldn't matter because where they're coming from at that moment it's not going to work out, right? So now we need to know how to handle those situations, okay? And that's called de-escalation. The funny thing is in the actual slide, it's a straight line. So now it's like, do, 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 do. We're going to be de-escalation. All right. So de-escalation. Why do people get upset? Ooh. What is de-escalation? Why de-escalate? When to de-escalate versus other interventions? Who should de-escalate? What de-escalation isn't? How many times can I say de-escalation in less than a minute? So let's talk about why people get mad. Some of this stuff will apply to you, some of it won't. Waiting, misunderstanding, being talked to in a way that they interpret as rude. This is a hard one because everybody has their own way of interacting with people. We had a staff member for a while who, her approach, someone described as gruff. She was a very loving and caring individual, but the way that her words came out of her mouth, it was a little rough. It was just a little, it was almost as if you could picture in the 1950s if a teacher or a principal was talking to you. It was just like, and you could almost see her finger pointing at you like, this I told you to do the. Guess what? That didn't go so well. We're going to be talking about trauma in just a minute, and one of the things that a lot of people who experience trauma, they have trouble with authority. So approaching them as if you're the authority and they're not the authority, it's not going to go well. It's not going to go well. So we have to be very, very mindful of how we approach people, because we can say the same words, but in a way that conveys concern. Or we can do it in a way that, I don't care about you, these are the rules, do it, do it, do it. We don't want to, again, that the people who don't get the Chi-Chi's invitations aren't the ones on this committee. Get them off. People are intoxicated, hallucination, pain. Unfortunately, a lot of our homeless individuals are in a lot of pain. They have a lot of chronic pain issues. And a lot of them have substance abuse problems. And a lot of them have mental health problems. You add all those together, you have some irritable individuals. And then being told bad news, like there's no beds at the shelter, or there's a wait list for the family shelters, well, they told me I couldn't get in housing because of this. Because really, there are some clients who their choices because of felonies or whatever, their chances of getting certain types of housing is very small in comparison to others. And even for the people who have great chances, there's still a wait, right? There's still so many people who need housing, and there's so few vouchers. So again, there's lots of reasons people get upset. Why do people get upset? Trauma. Now, I'm not going to walk up here. I want to walk up here and walk around, and I'm going to fall off, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to stay down here with you. Trauma. So who here, well, I'm not even going to do that, but I was going to say, who here has heard of PTSD? So PTSD, we've heard of it now for the past 20 years, right? It used to be called shell shock, and then finally they realized it's not just people who go to war who can get PTSD, it's anyone who goes through any type of trauma. And trauma can be different for what, if two people went through the same event, like a car wreck, or they were in the same platoon, or they were in the same household where there was domestic violence, their reactions to that are not going to be the same. They might be the same, but they typically are not. Some individuals experience PTSD, which is an ongoing after effect from trauma, and some don't. Right? What might traumatize one person might not traumatize another person. It's all very individualistic, right? And again, homelessness in and of itself is traumatic. Imprisonment, very traumatic. There's a lot of things that they, over the years, have come to understand what trauma is. Abuse, witnessing abuse, domestic violence, you name it. Abuse, neglect. Neglect is also traumatic. What happens is, for all of us, is that we have two parts of our brain, and this is how it was described to me. I don't know who came up with this, but I love this. So we have two parts of our brain. We have the old part of our brain, which is the thumb in this example, and then we have the new part of our brain. The old part of our brain is like when we were cavemen, and there's three things that it'll do. 3 F's: fight, flight, and freeze, right? So if I'm walking down the street and someone jumps out with a gun, I'm like, ah! And then I can do one of those 3 things. I'm either going to, like a deer in the headlights, I'm going to fight him, or I'm going to run away. Ah! That's what this part of the brain does. And then over time, we evolve to have this part of the brain, which is, let me think this through. If I fight this guy, I could really get hurt. So I don't want to do that. I'm going to run away. I'm going to run away. I'm going to run away. So that part of our brain is logic and reason. It can think through. It can play that tape to the end and say, I want this to happen, so I'm going to do this. So if I'm walking down the street, guy has a gun, this part, what happens is that this part gets deactivated. Whoop. And it's this part that gets activated. So again, I'm left with fight, flight, or freeze. I don't have this part of, what do I want to do? As I'm like sipping on my little Starbucks macchiato. What do I want to do about this situation? We don't have that ability. We don't. Because our brain knows in a situation like that, it's like instant. We have to come up with an instant reaction to save our life. Well, what happens is that for someone with trauma, this part of the brain gets activated at the least little thing. Usually what people tell me is that, if they have trauma, is that the thing that activates this, it could be a raised voice. And if you think about it, what is a raised voice? Someone's talking loud. Why would someone get triggered? Like for someone else who doesn't have trauma, it would take a gun to get me here. But for someone who has trauma, it's a raised voice. Well, when they were younger, when mom and dad started arguing, it always ended in physical violence. So for them, that's a warning sign. It's a trigger. It's a trigger for this part of the brain to get activated. And when we're in this part of the brain, again, we don't have that logic and reason, right? So this is what happens to someone with trauma, is that this part of the brain is often disengaged. Their ability to reason and think through things is disengaged, often, because of this trigger. And so that's why in therapy we help people figure out what their triggers are, and as soon as they see a trigger, what they need to do to avoid it. But when you're in the midst of homelessness and you're living outside and you're afraid that someone's going to steal your stuff or kill you, so the least little sound could trigger this part, which is the fight, flight, or freeze. So that's one of the things that individuals are affected by. They also suffer from memory problems, trouble focusing, irritability, distrust, anger problems, some word I can't read. So trauma triggers are different for every individual, right? For some people, like especially for veterans, it can be fireworks, right? Loud noises that remind them of gunfire. But it can be anything. It really can be anything. Like I have a client who got triggered when he saw people, like his mom got into an argument with someone else, and he got triggered from that, right? Any kind of thing that in the past, and it's not even a conscious thing. It's not like he's thinking, oh, this reminds me of the time where nope. It's instantaneous. It's instantaneous. Being told no, and again, it's authority figures, right? So if the person who was the abuser in their trauma situation was an authority figure, again, they're not going to like authority figures. And it may not even be conscious. They may not even be thinking, I don't like you because the way you talk to me, but the way that you're talking to them is triggering this stuff. So it's, again, just being very mindful. And the other thing is that if it's possible, because this may or may not be an issue for you, but like at our clinic, like our front office staff member who was very authoritarian in how she spoke to people, if the client was getting triggered, we separate them, right? We're going to be talking in a minute, like just tap them out, tap out that worker and say, oh, why don't you come over here and then I'll take you, right? Because if the person who's trying to de-escalate the situation is actually escalating the situation, the microphone's going away from my mouth, is that you need to get someone else in the mix who's not going to be escalating. We want to de-escalate. Okay, so briefly, we're going to be talking about trauma-informed care. Trauma-informed care is this. It's assuming that every individual you meet is traumatized. Simple as that. And it's a safe bet anyway, right? Like almost every single client I have has some form of trauma. It doesn't mean they necessarily have PTSD, like a diagnosable disorder, but they have trauma in some way. And the thing is that it's kind of like universal precautions. Like if you go to the dentist, they put on the gloves, and they put on the little mask, and they put on the little glasses, and they put on the little hat. Sometimes I'm like, what's the hat do? But they do all that stuff, and that's called universal precautions, because universal precautions, it is assuming that every patient that you're working with has some kind of like contagious disease. And it just protects them, right? And that's the universal precaution. It's an assumption to protect them and to protect the patient. Well, it's the same thing with this, right? So if we assume that everybody's traumatized, if we assume that, and then we use approaches for people experiencing trauma, then it's much less likely that we're going to trigger a reaction from them. And that's, again, we don't want to trigger people. We want to keep it cool and smooth and easy. We want everybody to be fine and smiling when at the end of the day. We want everybody to be going about their business and everybody's hunky-dory. It's not always going to be that way. But if we can just do a few things during that interaction that's going to make it go more smoothly, win-win, win-win, right? Like I tell my coworkers, we don't want the front window to be broken out. We don't want the trash can to be on fire. No, we don't want that. So trauma-informed care is an approach that assumes that everyone you're working with is traumatized. The thing is, this is kind of the crux of it. It's like, I like to think of it as kind of like a water cooler conversation. Like back in the day, we used to have water coolers. Now everybody has bottled water. But back in the day, the water coolers were like, when you were talking about going to Chi-Chi's later, you'd stand around the water cooler, and you'd be like, hey, you want to go to Chi-Chi? Yes, I do. But then also at the water cooler conversations, you'd be talking about, well, what's wrong with her? Did you hear what she said? What is wrong with her? The thing is that we have to change our mindset, right? Because when people act crazy, let's think about that. Do they really want to end up, like the person who came in and blew up our lobby last week, do they really want to go to jail? Did they? They didn't go to jail. They actually went to the hospital. But do they want bad things to happen in their life at that moment? No, that's not what they wanted, right? Right. So the question is what happened to them? If you ask that question in your mind, not asking the client that per se, but just asking yourself, what must have happened to them that led them to be at this moment, for them to be acting this way? Like instantly, what happens to me when I think of it that way, and I have to remind myself all the time to think this way because we're all trained like, what is wrong with him? You know, that's just our instant, like, what is wrong with them? But coming from that perspective, what happened to them, it brings instant compassion to your heart. You're like, I can't even imagine what must have happened to get them to this moment in time when they're acting this insane, right? It must have been really bad. And that's the whole thing about trauma-informed care, is that when you practice it, it brings you compassion, which is grace, right? Because a lot of times when you're in the midst of it and someone's cussing you out, you don't really, in the heat of the moment, sometimes it's hard to remember these things, right? But if you can, it will bring instant grace and allow you to interact with them with compassion. Because if you interact with someone with compassion, it's going to go better for you and them, right? And that's why we're here. It's really for them, but it's also for us. I don't want to be assaulted. I don't want anything bad to happen to me or my coworkers. No. And I want them to leave and not end up in jail because we've escalated them, right? So by just bringing this approach, it is helpful. Okay, the impact of trauma. So when I was talking earlier about this is some neurobiology stuff that's well above my head and pay grade, but basically it affects the brain. Ooh, I knew it was going to fall. It affects the brain. So when people go through trauma, it literally, they can do CAT scans or MRIs or whatever newfangled thing they have to show brain imaging nowadays. If you look at someone's brain with trauma and someone's brains without trauma, there is a distinct difference. Distinct. So it's not just like, this is how, this is science. This is science. So it literally changes them to that instant hyper arousal. And the way that they describe it to kids, that whole thing where I was talking about the old part of the brain, the new part of the brain, is they call this part the barking dog, and this part is the wise owl. So when the barking dog gets activated, bark, 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 the wise owl flies away. Like that's how they describe it to kids. So it's like, so when you get activated and triggered, you're not going to be thinking clearly. And what also happens is after like a kid gets in trouble, like in school, like he gets activated and he blows up and throws desks around or whatever, what happens is that there is a period of de-escalation that has to happen in the brain. And teachers often don't know that. So right after the thing, they're trying to talk to them and counsel them and figure out, like say in the future, you're not going to, and none of that's going inside. None of that's going in the little brain. Because there's a period of, once you're triggered, it has to, there's a word that I don't know. There's some kind of physical, biological word that I don't know, but basically it takes time to calm down. And that's the same with adults. It affects memory and perception, often fragmented and difficulty concentrating. Judgment, it affects insight, weigh consequences. The other thing is that a lot of the clients who have trauma, it was their caregivers who were their abusers. So what unfortunately happens is they don't know what a red flag is. Like, you know, if any of us were in the dating pool and started dating someone, if on our second date, the person was trying to control, like, how, our time or our money, we'd be like, that's a red flag. But for someone whose abuser was also their caregiver, it's these mixed messages. So often red flags are just completely disregarded because for them, well, that's typical. And this is part of love, is that we have to put up with this stuff. This is just normal. So trauma affects people's judgments. Okay, and that you really can't put too fine a point on that, because a lot of our clients, if you see them over and over again, you'll be wanting to pull your hair out. That's why where my hair went. Is that it's like you've told them over and over and over and over and over again, this is what you need to do to get connected to the resources you need, and they're not getting connected, or they keep going back to the abusive boyfriend, and you're like, I told you, you just need to leave him, and somehow they're still back there, because again, it's trauma affects people's abilities in many, many ways, and that's a whole nother ball of wax, but it affects their beliefs, it affects their frame of reference, what they believe, and their feelings, and their ability to connect with other people. Let me see, how much time do I want to talk about this, but I don't know that I have time. Okay, we might come back to this. This is a fascinating thing. If you can, again, this presentation will be on the Coalition's website. Go to this, listen, there's some really fascinating NPR stories about this study. And if we have time, I'll come back to it. It is fascinating. There was this weight loss study, but what it really was, it turned into, he didn't realize it was a trauma study, and how trauma affected things. And basically, there's a test that you can take, or anybody can take, and it measures how many traumatic events you've had in your life. And the more traumatic events you've had in your life, let me get to some of the things. It increased, well, that's not going to work. It increased it had a high correlation between like drug use, health problems, smoking. Basically, trauma affects so many, many things. Imprisonment, like there's a direct correlation. Like the more trauma you have, the more problems you have, right? And the thing is that I think slowly, we're starting to recognize people who have substance problems, people who are in prison. Like once you start really looking at the individual and their history, trauma. And the more you start recognizing that, the more you start realizing how our society is set up to not support victims of trauma, but in some sense to punish them if they do certain behaviors, right? But we're just, some of you might be like, what's going on? So like this is going to be the next wave, hopefully, is that, finally substance abuse, because it's so prevalent, is starting to get destigmatized somewhat, right? Somewhat. And I think trauma is the next front. Because once we start realizing, how traumatized individuals are, and we realize that there's such a need, for healing from that, well, I could talk on and on. I don't have that much time. Woo, woo, woo. So you get 1 point for every trauma. So if men with an ACE score of 6 or more were 46 more times likely to use IV drug use. That's crazy, right? That's insane. And people with a score of over 7 who didn't smoke or do anything else had a 360% higher risk of heart disease. So I mean, it's like the trauma literally impacted their physical health, because it does, right? That stress affects us very impactfully, if that's a word. Over 92% of mothers who were homeless have experienced severe physical or sexual abuse in their lifetime, so basically 100%. Mm-hmm. About 2/3 of homeless mothers have histories of domestic violence. I mean, it just goes on. I mean, it's just amazingly, I'm pressing the wrong button. 97% of homeless women with SMI have experienced severe physical and sexual abuse. 87% of this abuse, both in childhood and adult. I mean, it's just amazing. Like once you just kind of look at it, and so it does make sense that, like, I think once you start realizing, because I have, again, clients who've been homeless for over 17 years. But if you get in there, the trauma is phenomenal, right? And the more we all realize this, the more compassion we have for them, right? Because if we understand, like, there's a reason behind their choices, like, that's just so powerful. Because it's not just that they're lazy, right? I mean, it might seem that way. I mean, sometimes, oh, I'm sorry, question. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. SMI is severe mental illness. So like schizophrenia, bipolar disease, major depressive disorder. I'm so sorry. Thank you for doing that, because I'm just so used to usually I get this talk to social workers, so it's some of the stuff I'm just like blah blah blah. So please stop me if I do that. So yeah. Hello? Oh, it is.
Here we go.
Da-da-da. Okay. So now I feel like I'm really doing something now.
Oh, no, well, hold on a second.
Oh, he's got one too.
Yeah, let's use
We can
this.
do a duet. Islands in the street.
What are the words? Stop spreading the news.
Okay. So, where were we? We were, using trauma lens. Okay. So basically, this is just assuming, it's like putting glasses on when you start your day, so that every person you see, you assume they have trauma. Simple. That's all that it means. It's simple. Okay. Trauma-informed care. So it's just assume we got that. We got it. Viewing symptoms as adaptations. Thank you. Okay. I really want to get to the safety stuff. I just love this trauma stuff because it's so important. So not trusting, hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is constantly like looking around, making sure that you know who's behind you. You don't want anybody behind you. You know where the exits are. You know who's around you. You're always scanning. Little noises make you jump. That's hypervigilance. Not asking for help. There was a shelter for a while, and I don't know if it's still this way, that the men's shower, like the bathroom stalls, didn't have like doors on them. I mean, so, so many of the clients, male clients, and as males mean female clients, have sexual trauma, and so there's so little privacy when you're homeless. So it's set up for, just to really create a bad way for people. Fear of crowds, fear of bathing, again, open shower stalls, not willing to use medical or dental services, not taking medicine. So these are actually seeing them as a way to adapt to survive, right? Like these skills, unfortunately, as an adult, don't help people, right? I mean, because I have so many clients, because of their trauma symptoms, they can't navigate the system to get their needs met because they're so reactive and they're so irritable, and they blow up at the littlest thing, so they get barred from places. And because of their trauma, their symptoms comes out as behavior that gets them in trouble, and then they get barred, right? So basically, what this is doing is the more you understand about trauma, the more compassion you have right? And that's for all of us. And that's for me to this day, 17 years later, because some clients will drive you crazy. I mean, you'll be like, okay, you know. You bring yourself back, and then you re-enter with that compassionate mind frame. But it's not just like, one day you just wake up and you got it. No, it doesn't work that way. It's a constant reminder to yourself of what intention am I bringing into this situation, right? We have to be very, very mindful of that. Aggression, not waiting, finding a protector. That's the other thing. It's like, I told you to leave this guy, and you keep going back. Why? Well, he keeps me safe from, it's like, okay. Really, a lot of times our female clients end up always with a boyfriend because even though they may be abusive, they're not as abusive as some of the other individuals that she could be with, and he keeps her safe from that. So, really, it makes you start thinking, like, again, it's such a deeper thing, and it really makes you question, like, how our society judges people, right? Like, the good people and the bad people, it makes you really question things. Like, they were doing a story on the news recently, and this is not, again, to be disparaging of cops, but it's just an interesting way of thinking. Like, it was just a demonstration about something. He's like, well, this, and then the bad guy, we'll put him in here. And I'm like, the bad guy. You know what I'm saying? Like, the judgments we have. And again, it doesn't take long to get under the surface with that bad guy to see what really did happen to them that led them to this behavior, right? So again, it's just that reminding ourselves to be in that compassionate place when we walk outside that door to engage with these people. And it's also to bring this awareness to the other folks that in your community, because there's always folks that are ignorant about stuff like this. And their approach is more of that, this is the way it is. If you can't do it, too bad. That's where you all can be like, well, actually, Bob, are you aware of trauma and the impact of trauma on people's minds? There is advocacy within our own organization, churches, whatever, where we can bring compassion, more compassion in. Just because it's a church doesn't mean everybody in the church is compassionate. Woo! That may be blasphemy. I'm sorry if it is. But there we have it. And using drugs. Like, that's the other thing. Is like, so often people self-medicate, right? Because they can't sleep because of the nightmares that they're having because of the abuse. Or they're so angry all the time if they use pot that mellows them out. Or whatever it is. They self-medicate with substances. It's not just because they want to get drunk, right? It's actually, it's helping them in some way. And then unfortunately, addiction kicks in. And then there's a physical addiction in addition to, so trying to tell someone to stop using something that's helping them to get through their day, is, what I'm saying? It gets tricky. Okay, so trauma most often occurs in relationships, therefore healing happens in relationships. So again, just being a positive force in these people's lives. And what does this mean? Basically, by understanding trauma and its impact on behavior, we can be more compassionate, right? And we work to establish relationships with people who may have been humiliated, hurt, or betrayed by those who are supposed to be counted on for safety and protection. And by acknowledging this and approaching people with care and concern, the chance for our interaction to be positive, one, increases dramatically. And I'm guessing there's two L's in dramatically, but I'm not 100% sure of that now. De-escalation. This is my favorite. Okay. So, what is de-escalation? It's a way of interacting with people to help them calm down. That's what it is. This is my favorite. Okay. So, you all remember The Price is Right. It's still a thing, I think, right? It's still a thing. I think Drew Carey's on there now. When I was growing up, it was Bob Barker. And before that, I don't even know who was before that. This is the game where this little guy in lederhosen is going up the mountain. Remember this one? And it's like, you don't want him to go up the mountain, right? Because if you're like, like, okay, Paul, how much is the Palmolive? Is it $3.75 or is it $4.22? And if he's like, oh, it's $4.22, and they're like, no, it wasn't. It was $3.75. And the man goes, and he goes up the mountain, right? And then they're like, is this lawnmower $1,500 or is it $2? It's $2. And then so what happens is that if the little man goes all the way up and falls off the top because you've overestimated, boom, 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 you lose. And I like to think of this as the anger mountain. Yeah. So if your interaction starts off down low and then it goes up real high, if he falls off the mountain, that's when things get broken, right? That's when bad times happen. We don't want him to go up there. The nice thing is that it's much easier to bring the little guy down the mountain if he's only going up a couple steps, right? Than it is to turn him all the way down from the top of the, right? Because we've had some staff members who can escalate somebody like nobody's business, and then then I have to go in, bring them down from the top of the mountain, and that's not a fun thing to do. That's not a fun thing to do. But it's much easier that if we bring in a calm approach early on and recognize when someone's getting escalated, if we do some de-escalation and bring them right on down, that mountain. That's what we want to do. And again, it prevents all these things. The police, people getting barred. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Wow, that was something. Okay. It wasn't supposed to do all that. When to de-escalate versus other measures. So this is the thing. It's like I always am for de-escalation, but there are some times when it's beyond de-escalation. Like if someone's throwing a table at you, beyond de-escalation. If the person says, I'm going to kill you, beyond de-escalation. If the person is so enraged they cannot engage in conversation, beyond de-escalation. That sounds like a Calgon product, beyond de-escalation. There's many a day where I could use some beyond de-escalation. Is this person impaired, like if they're cognitively impaired or substance abuse, like they're so intoxicated and they're enraged, and we may be beyond de-escalation. And you'll know quickly, right? Like once you start going in there with your mirroring technique and say, hey, how you doing? The stuff's being thrown around, beyond de-escalation. Okay. Are they acting in a way that doesn't support, memorize this one, that doesn't support positive resolution, right? Like you're going out there and giving it your all, and they're like, beep, 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 beep. They're, telling you what to do with your next door neighbor and their dog and whatever. Then we might be beyond de-escalation at that point. But just being mindful. I don't know why I put that image there, but it's really cute. When someone is agitated but not currently an active threat. Okay. The other thing is that some folks who are not accustomed to dealing with intoxicated people or mentally ill people might be a little afraid if someone's using some very interesting, colorful language. So those individuals should not be on the housing committee. They and the people who aren't going to Chi-Chi's, maybe they can go to Chi-Chi's together, because they shouldn't be on there. Because the thing is that anyone experiencing homelessness, if you interact with anyone, there's a chance that they could be using some interesting language and some loud tones of voice. Now, there is a difference, and this is kind of a finesse thing that you have to learn, is when someone's just upset, right? Or versus in their cussing, versus cussing at you, right? Those are two different things. I have clients all day long, they cuss up a storm, but I know the difference. Like, they are not cussing at me, they're just upset, right? And so when I go into a situation, I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And I'm going to have to get to the safety thing in just a really second. Boop, beep, boop, boop. Is that my whole thing when I interact with someone, instantly my question in my mind is this a safe situation? Is this a dangerous situation? And as soon as I know the answer, oh, this person's frustrated, but they're not going to hurt me or anybody else, we're good to go, right? And then I go into figure out what the problem is and what the solutions are. But it does take finesse, right? And sometimes it takes experience, but if there's a lot of fear on your part, then maybe someone else is the right. And it's always good to have some level of fear, right? Because I always am suspect. I'm always like, this could always turn bad, right? Like anytime I interact with someone brand new, it could always go bad, right? I'm assuming it's not, but you never know. Okay. Oh, 10 minutes left. Okay, let's go to, okay, so always have a backup. Always have someone to be your Robin. So make sure someone, and the thing is if you're going in and you're in charge, direct other people what to do. Like, okay, I need you to call 911. This guy's injured. Tell the ambulance to come because he broke his leg. I need you to go get me a blanket or whatever it is. So like, someone needs to be in charge and telling people what to do. I'm pressing the wrong button again. De-escalation isn't giving in. When I first started teaching de-escalation, the frontline staff was like, well, you're just, they're coming in, they're yelling and screaming, and you're taking it in the back, and they're coming out all calm and laughing, and so you're just giving in to them. You're just giving them what they want. And it's like, do they hurt anybody? Well, no. Okay. Do they walk out smiling? Yes. Did they get barred from the clinic? No. All the good things happen, right? Now, when they are calmer, next time I can say, next time you're upset, let's do this. Rather than like threaten or rather than like cuss in the lobby, because we have other clients with children and we can't have that, right? Like I'm not going to do it at that moment, but the next time. The thing is that the goal is we want everything copacetic. We don't want anyone barred. We don't want anybody in jail, right? Breathing. Safety first. Determine whether you can be with this person and be reasonably safe. The other thing is inform people of potential danger. If you have someone who's losing their mind and throwing stuff and there's like a door right there, make sure someone's standing on the other side of the door preventing other people from coming in. Like we've had situations like in the building, like in one of our other buildings that had an elevator, like no one was down at the first floor to prevent people from coming up because the thing was right in front of the elevator on the second floor. So people would get off there and be like, like, oh no. So make sure, to inform other people what's happening. And also let them know, if you're the only one going out to a situation, tell someone else in the building or text someone and say, I'm going to be out front, whatever. Don't make sure, because Lord help me, I don't have time. But there was this situation where I was watching a client and he was just yelling and he was going up to this guy and they were going to fight out front. And so me, not thinking, just ran on out there. And then I ended up in the middle of Muhammad Ali, between these two guys, on the phone with the police, trying to get them to come, directing traffic around them as they were trying to fight. Because what I should have said is to the front desk, I'm going to run out here, call the police, there's a fight. Or call code green, that's how we would do it, call code green. And the thing that we need to do, and I know I don't have time, and we'll talk more about it in the Q&A section hopefully, is to have a system in place, right? So we have a code green, and luckily we were blessed with an intercom system, so we can, over the intercom, say we have a code green, and that's a security. And so we have a security team. We don't have security guards, but just the people who are on the team all come for those security incidents. And they page code green, they do it 3 times, and the location. Code green to the lobby, code green to the lobby, code green to the lobby. Because when you hear it the first time, you just know that there's a page, you have no idea what they said. The second time you hear code green, but you didn't hear where. The third time you hear security and where it was. That we'll definitely get into that in the Q&A. Be firm, no yelling. Set boundaries. Respect personal space. Do not touch people and do not get close to them. Do not be in kicking radius. Make sure they have an exit. Make sure they have an exit. Make sure you have an exit. And do it at an angle. So if the person's right here, I would do like this. That way they can run. That way I can run, right? We want to make sure we all, and again, most of these situations, I don't mean to scare people, but I think it's just so important to be ready, right? That we always are cognizant. Just as much as we're being cognizant of people having trauma, we're being cognizant of safety. We want everybody to be safe. Don't wear dangly earrings, ladies. I love a dangly earring, but anything dangly, it can be like, pulled. And again, the things like this are very rare. But these are just safety concerns. Again, just to be on the radar. Oh, the other thing, no heavy, sharp objects. Like I had this award. It was this pointy, like glass thing that I had on my desk forever. And I went to a conference and they were like, don't have Sharba. I'm like, oh my God. All right, so don't be carrying around your trophies with you. Okay, tap out. So if it's a bad day for you, or if you see Sally in there and she's like escalating a client like nobody's business, just tap Sally and have an understanding that, you know, if something's going bad, if someone taps you out, it means just tap out and they'll take over, right? Because some clients will interact well with some people and they won't with others. Like you might remind them of their grandma and love you, but if you remind them of their aunt's, you know, Bertha, it's bad times. So just be respectful of that. Leave your ego at the door. Because the thing is that clients will say things that hurt your feelings. And sometimes they mean it, sometimes they don't. And in the heat of the moment, you know, when they're telling you about your weight or your lack of hair or whatever it is, don't take it personally. Because some clients will, I say clients, but some individuals will just try to bait you into an argument just to see what happens, try to push a button. So don't let them do it. Afterwards, go to, you know, go to Starbucks or go get some ice cream and deal with that or process it. That's the other thing that's important, I think, when you have compassion teams, is to debrief with each other about how things went. Not only to learn for the next time, but just to get the feelings out. Because trust me, when you have an incident, you will have some feelings, and you don't want to carry it home with you. You want to, you know, heal from it. So it's so important, because the thing is that as being a social worker, most like my friends aren't social workers, so they don't get it. So if I tell them about the guy who, you know, destroyed the lobby, or the one that threw up on this and then turned this thing into a projectile, and whatever it was, like my friends are, oh my gosh, I don't know how you do what you do. I could never. Of course, you could never do it. But, you know, it's so important that you have a compatriot who gets it, you know, so that when you tell them at the end of it, you both are like, yes, I get it. And then you're like, ha, ha, ha. You know, that's always a sign. Like if you're laughing at the end of it, that person got you and you got them and it's all better, right? But if you have to explain, like, what, you know, it's not going to work out. So have a compatriot. Once the person is calmed down, so let's say you have an incident where somebody does something, but it's not enough to call the police or whatever, and they go on their merry way, the next time that they're there and calmer, that's the time to say. Because again, remember that we were talking about the child who gets in trouble in school, and then the teacher's trying to explain to them immediately after the fact, like, next time, blah, it's not even registering in their brain, right? So the next time they come and they're calmer, you can say, hey, buddy, you know, last time you did this, this, and this. Guess what? You can't do that anymore. I'm sorry, okay? We're glad to we welcome you here. You're welcome to come to our church service, but you can't do X, Y, Z, elemental P. Okay, thanks. Next steps. Okay, okay, if de-escalation fails, you can call the police. I mean, we do. I mean, sometimes, like, when the client was literally throwing tables and chairs and trying to break the windows, and we did de-escalation like nobody's business, and they were still doing it, we called the police. In fact, they told us to call the police. Got this, thank you. Or is it 10 or is it wave? We're 5? Oh, we got 5. Okay, yeah. Okay, so that's the that's the last ditch effort. We're only doing that when we absolutely have to. Code green. So again, basically understanding what, if your organization or church doesn't have a security policy, you probably need to talk about it, right? Like if something were to happen, what do we do? And if there is a team, or if you need to come up with a team, you know, a security team, then coming up with some very straightforward things. Like if this happens or that happens, what do we do? How do we alert others to what's happening? Okay, what is it? Take your phone with you. That's the other thing. Take your phone with you. If you're going to go out, there's a homeless individual camping out, take your phone with you. You may need to call the ambulance for them. You may need to call back in the building and say, I need you to come out and help me with this, or whatever. Take your phone with you. I wouldn't take your valuables. I wouldn't be carrying, you know, your purse and just kind of waving around. I would leave that in a secure location. I would not. Okay. Who are your security leaders? One person must assume the role of lead. They are the ones that tell the other people what to do. It's best to have, at least one Robin who just stands back and waits for you tell me what to do. We don't want to swarm. No swarming. No swarming. Okay. Again, if you say, I need you to call the ambulance, then whoever does that needs to stick around so that when the ambulance comes, they can be like, they're over here, this is what's going on. Okay? We need people to educate. Because literally, or like at our place of work, sometimes what will happen is someone will call a code green to a certain location and then just leave. And then so you're walking into the lobby full of clients and you're like, which one is it? Who's in trouble? Like what's saying? Like, so whoever calls a code green or whoever alerts to people to the situation needs to stick around to let everybody know what's what. 4 to 5 responders. Now that again, most of you all, maybe 1 or 2, that may be all you have. And this is really for a security incident. Like if something was really going on, this would be where we would have it. If people are fighting, again, it's the last thing to do is to call security, 911. And then following a discussion of the incident should definitely be discussed. What could be done differently? What did we learn from this event? How could we do things differently? 2 minutes, thank you. It's also so important because I don't know how often you all will be doing this, but if you do this on the regular, it can cause some things, feeling-wise. It can cause compassion fatigue. And I like to talk about this, and this is, I know I don't have time for this, but like a big pitcher of sweet tea with like fresh lemons and mint and ice, and it's all sugar, it's beautiful. And think of that as your compassion. And then throughout the day, you're pouring it out here and there and here and there and here and there. And by the end of the day, it's done. And if you don't take care of yourself, then the next day, all you have is that pitcher with those stained lemons and some raggedy mint in there, and that's all you have, and you have nothing to pour back out. And so that's why it's so important to have someone else who gets this with you, so you can talk to and help heal each other, because these feelings we carry with us. These feelings we carry with us, and we have to do something with them. Because when we witness suffering, this intense, intense suffering, it can really impact us in a very negative way. And in order to keep doing what you're doing, you have to address it in some way. And I always recommend therapy, friends, chocolate, ice cream, White Castle, whatever your healing medicine is, that's, we need to focus on it. And I know I'm wrapping up. Remember, okay, we knew that. So every interaction has a chance of success. We have to do our part, and we have to maintain safety. That's really the main thing. We already talked about that. And then there's also, I think there's an engagement handout that we came up with that's also going to be it'll be on the website. And it just has some very simple questions and approaches and things to remember, some of these safety tips for you. It's just a one-sheeter that, it'd be helpful just to kind of keep posted in the area wherever the outreach people are going to be. And then, so there's the resource manual on the left, and then there's the street tip book on the right. And you can call the coalition, and they'll probably even deliver some to you, the street tip books. The resource manual will be online. You can print it out. It's 1 million pages, or you can just print out which page you need according to the situation. Final thoughts. The other thing is I really want to encourage all of you all to be up front with, if you're on a committee or whatever, if you're the ones going out, and if you have any concerns, if you're afraid, if you are uncertain, talk about it, right? Talk about it. Because if you have concerns, there are other people who have concerns too who aren't talking about them. And the more you talk about them, you can come up with approaches to deal with those concerns. If you're unsure of how to handle the situation, just ask. And And the other thing is like in just a few minutes, we're going to have up here some very good outreach workers. And there are some experts who you can call to help you figure out what to do in certain situations. And remember, what you do does make a difference. And so I'm so grateful. I was like, when she told me how many people were going to be here today, I was so excited because it's so like we have one of the most compassionate, loving communities, and like that's why I love living in Louisville, because it's just amazing and beautiful. So I'm grateful for you all taking the time out for this. I'm just so grateful for it. And I think that's it. And there's my email. If you want, please feel free.
Thank you very much, very, very, very much, Tim. We're not too far behind, so I think we will continue on if Aaron is here, and is Matt here?